Could we please close the doors to enjoy our quiet? The gentleman from Virginia may continue when ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That progressive and democratic-oriented groups were targeted. I'll ask unanimous consent that this press release be entered into the record from the Ways and Means Committee, but I will read from it. The group of democratic-leaning organizations was denied tax-exempt status by the IRS after their applications were pending for over 3 years. These denials happened during the period of the TICDA's audit, but they were not disclosed by the IG in the audit report or during his testimony before our committee and the Ways and Means Committee. These applications were processed in the same manner as the Tea Party cases outlined in the TICDA's audit report released on May 14th. The cases were identified and screened for political activities. They were transferred to exempt organizations' technical unit. They were the subject of a sensitive case report. They were subject to multiple levels of review within the IRS, and they were reviewed by the IRS Chief Counsel. The Chairman has asked for evidence. I would be glad to make sure that this evidence from the Ways and Means Committee, our colleagues on the Ways and Means Committee, is provided to the Chairman and his staff, and I would ask that this be entered into the record.
Reserving. For the gentleman, as long as you don't want to call it evidence, we don't call press releases.
No. I'm not referring to this as evidence, Mr. Chairman.
We're happy to put the press.
It describes evidence, and I'm happy to make sure that evidence is made available to you.
We look forward to seeing that evidence. It has not been provided to the majority or minority at this time, but I thank the gentleman, and without objection, it will be entered in the record.
I thank the Chairman, and I thank our two witnesses, and I'm sorry you have to be here today, but thank you for coming.
We now go to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Mica.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And first of all, just a comment observing this process today and through the past couple of months that we've been working on this IRS thing. I'm disappointed that the ranking member on the other side of the aisle have chosen to continuously try to close down this process of discovery to get to the bottom of what took place.
Would the gentleman yield for just 5 seconds? That's absolutely not true.
Well, first of all, I didn't yield, but he said that. But we started this on the 22nd of May. On the 9th of June, Mr. Cummings said, you can put it up on the screen based on everything I've seen the cases solved, started almost immediately to try to close this down. When they couldn't do that, they tried to discredit the chairman, and then they released time and time again, as we interviewed folks, different transcripts, taking parts out and trying to, again, discredit the process. When they couldn't discredit the chairman, and we proceeded in a very orderly fashion, now they're attempting to discredit the Inspector General. And I find that offensive because whether they targeted conservative or progressive groups, it's our responsibility to get to the truth and find out what happened. We've done this in a methodical manner. In fact, we first went to the Cincinnati folks, and we've only had, Mr. Hull, you're the second IRS official at the Washington level we have, I understand. Is that correct, Mr. Chairman? So you're the first one we have it. We've gone first to, and I think there were 8 folks or so that we interviewed that the rogue employees, and I'd never met one before, but you look very good for rogue employee, this Hoffaker, I'm sorry, but in any event, you started getting these cases in the beginning of 2010, was it approximately?
Sir, it was the end of April 2010.
Okay, the beginning of 2010, and you, this wasn't a targeting by a group of your colleagues in Cincinnati that decided we're going to go after folks. And most of the cases you got, were they Tea Party or Patriot cases?
Sir, they were all Tea Party or Patriot cases.
Were there progressive cases? How were they handled?
So I was on this project till October of 2010, and I was only instructed to work Tea Party / Patriot / 9/12 organizations.
Okay. And then you sought counsel for advice from higher up in Washington, and that was Mr. Hall sitting next to you?
Yes, sir, I was instructed to contact Mr. Hull.
Okay. And did you get advice back? What was happening at the local scene? Would any of those affected contacted you? Was it, or just you were just waiting for Hull? What was going on?
So I'm not real clear on what you're asking. Could you rephrase that,
well,
please?
like taxpayers or those that submitted these requests, did you hear from them at all?
Yes, sir. When certain taxpayers responded, as Mr. Hull and I both earlier said, I sent him a copy of the response, and he was to get back to me in order to process the response. The taxpayers called me when I had not gotten any instruction from Mr. Hull to find out the status.
And that didn't happen. So, Mr. Hull, you had also contacted Ms. Lerner for advice and counsel, and also I understand that the counsel, the IRS counsel, is that correct?
I gave my recommendations to my reviewer, and my reviewer sent them up to Ms. Kendall, and Ms. Kendall suggested that they should go to Chief Counsel. I don't recall.
So Kendall is in Lerner's office, and then
did
she tell you that something had gone to the legal counsel?
Ms. Kendall suggested or said that the cases should go to the Chief Counsel.
So, and the Chief Counsel is one of the two, I believe, IRS employees that are political appointees. Is that correct, staff? I'm not sure, but I think that's the case. So far we find that, again, Cincinnati rogue employees, in quotes, are asking for advice from Washington. You're in Washington. You're the second person we've had from Washington. I think we had Mr. Schulman was the only other one. So we're just beginning this investigation. We're just starting this. It's not going to be closed down.
Would the gentleman wrap up?
Yes. So finally, Mr. Hull, again, you sought counsel and advice from above. That didn't come. You never got it down below. And finally, what happened? Did you step aside or seek another assignment, Ms.?
The gentleman may answer briefly. The gentleman's time has expired.
Were you asking me, sir?
No, I was trying to get back to her not getting answers, the frustration she experienced, and I was told. I told you.
Do you understand the question?
I was told you finally.
If you do, you may answer, but we're out of time.
Sir, yes, I did get transferred out of there.
At your request.
Yes, sir, I did.
Thank you.
Thank you. We now go to the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Lynch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank the ranking member. I thank the witnesses for coming before the committee and trying to help us with our work. I would like to try to reset this if I could. It seems we're getting in a debate about whether or not it was fair for the IRS to add enhanced scrutiny for Tea Party groups if they did the same thing for progressive groups. And I just want to point out that when the Inspector General, Mr. George, came before the committee, he indicated there were three classifications of U.S. citizens that were subject to enhanced scrutiny. One, he did identify Tea Party groups, Patriot groups, ones of a more conservative ideology. He also mentioned progressive groups, but he also mentioned another category that sort of subsumes both those groups. He said that there were enhanced scrutiny of groups that were critical of the way the government was being run, which in my district is about 90% of the population, including myself at times. And I think it's unfortunate that the allegations against the White House were made because it became a game of gotcha of whether or not the White House was somehow implicated here. Those facts are not in evidence yet. But I think we're missing an opportunity here because what we do know is that the IRS was targeting groups who were critical of the way the government is being run, which is a core democratic right, small d democratic, and a core right for every citizen. Ms. Hoffaker, have you, in your experience there, have you come across groups that were targeted because of their, could you call it, criticism of the way the government is being run?
No, sir, I have not.
Okay. What about yourself, Mr. Hall?
I'm not aware of any, sir.
Would, but you are aware of instances where Patriot or Tea Party were investigated?
Only what I read in the newspapers, sir.
Only what?
Only what I read in the newspapers, sir.
I see. Okay. How about you, Ms. Hoffaker?
Sir, I don't understand what you're asking.
Well, why do you think the folks that had those labels, why do you think they were being investigated?
Do you mean scrutinized by the IRS, or why we were?
Yeah.
Well, each application is evaluated on the facts and circumstances in that particular case, and consequently.
But these are, be on the lookout, be on the lookout for Patriot, be on the lookout for Tea Party. That, I mean, help me if you can. Those seem to be political positions and indicia of a political view, and so the IRS is focusing on that. And I'm just curious.
Well, when I was there in 2010, sir, I was instructed to develop these applications.
And what does that mean?
That means that somebody else screened them out for whatever reason, and I was assigned these applications that met the parameters of Tea Parties.
Okay. Well, you're the one who was involved in the process. Why are these people being singled out then?
Because the screeners or the management identified that they should be screened out, or for this particular reason.
And who was the individual who screened them for you?
Well, it was a whole group. There were several screeners. That was what they were tasked to do based on my understanding.
Okay. I have about 20 seconds left. I just think it's disgraceful that we're squandering this opportunity to get to the bottom of this because of partisan bickering. One group trying to blame the president, the other one trying to defend themselves that progressives were also being targeted. I think it's very unfortunate because I think the root of this matter is that people who are critical of the way this government is being run were being targeted. Regardless of what the source of their gravamen was, what the source of their complaint was, they were being targeted as U.S. citizens by the IRS. And I think we've squandered the opportunity to get to the bottom of this. I yield back.
I'd ask unanimous consent. I have 30 seconds without objection. Mr. Lynch, I couldn't agree with you more. And hopefully you are setting a tone that we will all observe going forward. And I'll do my best.
I ask unanimous consent for 30 seconds. I said in the beginning of what I said. I think that and I've said it 50 million times, we've got to get to the bottom of this. There have been recommendations made by the IG. We need to make sure those, and I don't think that people want the IRS to be destroyed. They want it to function the way it's supposed to function for everybody, conservatives, progressives, those in the middle. Thank you very much, Senator.
Thank you. We now go to the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've heard Mr. Hull in his 48 years' experience say that these cases were handled in a very unusual manner, and Ms. Hoffaker, I understand that you said that in your 14 years' experience these cases were handled differently. Was that the word?
Yes, sir, that is correct.
And you had 40 to 60 of these cases that were given to you, and in April and then in October you requested a transfer. Is that correct?
Well, sir, the number that you had just stated was how many I had assigned to me when I left in October of 2010. Initially, I had maybe about 20.
I see. And prior to this, how common was it that you would be told by someone in Washington to hold up applications?
It wasn't very common at all.
And was your frustration coming from the fact that you felt that you had enough information to go ahead and process these applications, but you basically were just made to sit on them?
Well, my frustration primarily was that I had to sit on them and wait for guidance from D.C.
Now, I'm told an IG report in May said there were 72 Tea Party groups, 11 9/12 groups, 13 Patriot groups. Now I'm told those numbers have been revised upward to say there were 298 Tea Party groups and 3 groups that had the word progressive in the application, 0 that had the word occupy. But also, staff tells us that Washington officials asked for 2 additional Tea Party cases that would serve as test cases. As of the present, one of those cases is still pending, and the other case, the application process was withdrawn because the persons or persons, quote, couldn't take it anymore. I would assume that that's extremely unusual to be delayed from 2010 when you worked on these cases till now, 2013. And still all these cases are still apparently pending.
Yes, sir.
This investigation was started in part because of complaints from Tea Party groups to various members of Congress. We don't have any evidence yet or any comment yet that any progressive groups, these 3 that had the word progressive, ever complained to any member of Congress about their hold-up, if they were held up. But you also know that this was started in part, not entirely from the complaints from members, but Lois Lerner said at an ABA conference that Tea Party and Patriot groups were being targeted. What was your reaction when you heard about that comment?
Well, as I said previously, and it's been reported, I said it was like a nuclear strike.
And did you and other people in the Cincinnati office feel that they were being unfairly blamed or used to excuse this political activity that was going on in the Washington office?
Well, I can't comment on what others, but personally, I felt like it was a nuclear strike. I felt they were blaming us.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Would the gentleman yield?
Yes, I'll yield the rest of my time to you.
The gentleman, Mr. Lynch, has left, but you've been asked repeatedly about the politics of it. And I just want to take a moment to say that I appreciate that both of you are not political folks and that it is appropriate that, no surprise, you did everything, as far as we know, very professionally. So particularly for Ms. Hoffaker, I want to thank you again for being here. You represent a larger group who have all said similar things. You were chosen, quite candidly, because of the time frame that you had these cases. But we appreciate, and maybe this is not a lottery you wanted to win, but we appreciate the fact that you're here today to speak on behalf of many people that you work with in Cincinnati who, as far as we can tell by the close of this hearing today, we will understand they did what they could do. They were limited as to what they could do. They moved it to Washington. Mr. Hull, to a great extent, we've had you here to show that you and others who got cases after you did what they could do, and as far as we know, waited on others to make decisions. And I thank you. And with that, we go to the gentlelady from California, Ms. Spear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you both for your service in a department, frankly, that none of us like, right? But nonetheless, we recognize the great value that you provide to making sure that everyone is treated equally under the law. And let me just start off with you, Ms. Hoffaker. Isn't it true that in the division within Cincinnati that you were working in, that your responsibility was to determine whether or not applicants for 501c4 status met the definition, which meant that they could not primarily be engaged in political activity?
Yes, it is.
And as a result, it has always been your task, at least when you were doing that there, to scrutinize applications to make sure that it was less than 50%.
It was our job to make a determination to ensure that they were 51% social welfare.
And there was an unusual increase in the number of applications during that period of time, was there not?
From what I understand, I believe that's correct.
All right. You stated in your written testimony that there were occasions when other agents sent you applications from liberal or non-Tea Party type groups. When that occurred, pursuant to the instructions that you were given, I would send these applications to general inventory since they were not within the scope of the Tea Party emerging issue. When you met with committee staff, you were asked whether you received direction to send non-Tea Party cases back to general inventory. And I'm going to read the exchange. Do you remember if anyone told you to send progressive or liberal cases back to general development? No, I don't remember anything like that. It's just made sense to you? Exactly, because my function was to develop Tea Party and work with Carter Hall and the Tea Parties. Can you explain the discrepancy between these two statements?
Ma'am, I was instructed by management to work Tea Parties. It was on the BOLA list, and anything that did not meet the parameters in that BOLA list, I sent to general inventory.
But you didn't know what happened to those non-Tea Party cases?
No, ma'am, I do not.
How many do you think you referred to inventory?
I can't estimate that.
I mean, was it 5 or was it 50?
Ma'am, I sent everything back that didn't meet the parameters of Tea Parties, both on the right and on the left.
Okay. So it was a significant number then?
It seemed at the time. I can't estimate how many.
One of the documents obtained by the committee is a PowerPoint presentation for a 2010 training session instructing employees on how to handle applications for tax-exempt status from groups engaged in political activities. It has photos of an elephant and a donkey, not very good ones, but, and since that the employees should look for names like the following. And you see there on the next page it shows what those employees should be looking for. Terms Tea Party on the next page, Patriots, 912 Project. Then on the following page it says to look for the word progressive. And there's lots of redacted information there, which I understand may be a list of progressive or left-leaning groups. When you turn to the next page, the slideshow explains that most of these applicants will file a 501c4. And it says that the concerns are that there may be more than 50% political, possible PAC political action committees. Do you recall attending this training?
I did not specifically recall attending that training.
Do you dispute that you were there at the training?
I do not recall. I do not dispute that I was there either.
So I understand that your plate was full handling a lot of these Tea Party applicants. And you referred non-Tea Party cases back to the general inventory. Based on this training document, it appears that someone else may have been looking at progressive groups. Is that a logical assumption to make?
I don't have the facts to verify that.
So you never talked to anyone else in the Cincinnati office that might have been looking at another segment that were...
I do not recall talking to anybody else.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, based on these training materials, I think we need to see what is under those redactions and examine in more detail how these progressive cases were handled as well.
I agree with the gentlelady. We would like to see the claim of 6103 modified to be more reasonable. I wouldn't mention that Teddy Roosevelt was a progressive, that the term is not automatically liberal.
Well, no, but my point is that there's a lot under that second bullet that has been redacted, and for us to really do an exhaustive investigation. We really need to know that. And to the extent that Ms. Hoffaker has testified that she did return significant numbers, we should find where did those significant numbers of applications go and have someone come testify on them.
I agree with you, and this committee has reached out and asked, and I will ask again, theoretically with a larger audience, that if there's any progressive group that was held for 3 years, asked abusive questions, asked about their campaign activities, their board of directors, their names of their contributors and so on, I would ask them that they come forward, because they can get us around this arcane 6103 law that causes victims not to be protected but rather re-victimized. And I join with the gentlelady that I would like to see groups on the left and the right be able to come to us as victims and get some resolution rather than being re-victimized by a system that is supposed to protect confidential information. So I join with the lady in total agreement.
Thank you.
With that, we go to the gentleman from Ohio who is keying up his mic, Mr. Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hall, you've got 48 years of experience with the IRS. In your annual reviews and evaluations, were those all positive?
Yes, sir, they were.
And most of the time that you've spent at the IRS, you dealt with applications for tax-exempt status?
Yes, sir.
You're viewed as an expert in this field. Is that fair to say?
Which field, sir?
Dealing with applications for, I mean, you're dealing with politicians here. You can give the yes answer. That's fine. We're used to boasting and bragging.
I'm very knowledgeable about working applications.
Okay, so you're an expert. Isn't it true you've conducted the training sessions, right?
Yes, I have.
And in some of those training sessions, Lois Lerner even showed up and was present at some of those training sessions. Is that true?
I don't recall, sir.
Okay. Other witnesses we've talked to said that that's the case. And you were assigned the now famous 2 test cases that dealt with 2. I think it's important. These were test cases of Tea Party groups. You were assigned those 2 cases. Is that correct?
Yes.
And in your testimony, you said those cases were taken from you in August of 2011. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And they were given to, my understanding is they were given to Hillary Gohausen. Is that correct?
That is correct as far as I know.
And can we put the slide up real quick? Because we want to talk about, do you know how long Hillary Gohausen had been at the IRS when she got those cases? Do you know?
I'm not sure how long.
Well, we do, because we ask her. And how long have you been with the IRS? Is a question that Hillary. I've been with the IRS since late April 2011. Prior to this time, had you had any experience in campaign intervention, lobbying, or as it relates to tax-exempt organizations? No. So we got a lady who's been at the IRS 4 months, never dealt with this area, who now gets the 2 infamous test cases. They take him from a guy who's been there 48 years with stellar evaluations, and they give him to this individual. Correct?
Yes.
Okay, fine. So here's what I want from your testimony. They were taken from you after you made recommendations on how to deal with the test cases. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So, and just for the other side to know, the recommendations were split. You said one group should be approved for tax-exempt status, and one should be disapproved and get further information, further data. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And they gave them to someone who had no experience dealing with this. And they also took them away from you after, according to your testimony, you met with the chief counsel's office. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So this is, I think, important to understand. The real harassment of Tea Party groups wasn't just the fact that they applied and maybe were denied. The fact was they had to wait. They never got resolution. Because even if you're denied, you have an appeals process. You can finally get some closure through an appeal process. So the real harassment was never getting to an answer. Mr. Hull, with 48 years experience, the expert, conducts the training sessions, gives recommendations on the test cases, and they say, oh, wait a minute, we're not going to let that happen. We're going to hold these cases. We want to continue to further harass these entities, and furthermore, we're going to take them away from you and not give you any more. And we do that after he's made the recommendations and after there's been a meeting with the chief counsel's office. That's why this is all about Washington and this chief counsel's office, and why we're going to have Mr. Wilkins in front of this committee at some point in the future. Ms. Hoffaker, you're a public servant. You've served at the IRS for 14 years, I think, if I got that right?
Yes, sir, that is correct.
Prior to that, you served our country wearing the uniform of our country as a veteran. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, I was both active duty and reserve.
Tell me how you felt when Lois Lerner, with the plan in question on May 10th, goes public and says this was inappropriate actions by line people in Cincinnati.
So like I said before, it was like a nuclear strike, and I still think...
That's a term you used with
the earlier interviews.
With your interview with staff, a nuclear
Correct.
strike. And so you would agree with Cindy Thomas, one of your bosses in Cincinnati, who said people in Cincinnati felt like they were being thrown under the bus.
I'm not sure the context that was stated in, but literally that statement, I would agree with that.
Let me ask you one other question here, and then I'll close, Mr. Chairman. You were asked in your interview by our staff, Ms. Hoffaker, this specific question. Do you think the public has been purposely misled by assertions that Cincinnati was to blame? And your response was?
Yes, I believe so.
Yeah, I think your response, was, according to what we have, was
Yes.
exactly. So statements made by folks in Washington, 2 rogue agents, this narrative that was trumpeted out there and bandied about, statements made by the White House press secretary, apparent conduct by IRS officials in Cincinnati, IRS line personnel had improperly targeted conservative groups. They were purposely, according to your statement, you think folks in Washington were purposely, that's the key point. You said you think it was a purposeful misleading of the facts and what really took place.
So in my opinion, when Lois Lerner made that statement, that would be correct.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. We now go to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Ms. Hoffaker and Mr.
I'm sorry, Mr. Cartwright. I apologize.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Yeah.
Mr. Hall and Ms. Hoffaker, thank you both for being here, and I want to thank you both for your long service. Mr. Hall, according to the transcript of your interview with committee staff, you stated that the processing of Tea Party cases was subject to, quote, substantial delays, unquote, because, quote, we didn't know exactly where we were going, unquote. Is that still your testimony?
Yes, sir.
And what did you mean by that?
It just meant that I was receiving no indication of which way we should be going with the, I had made some recommendations, and I was not told whether those recommendations would be accepted or not. All I was told was we need additional information.
All right. And now, Ms. Hoffaker, you previously told the committee that Mr. Hall took a long time to give you guidance on development letters for Tea Party applicants. You're not suggesting that Mr. Hall intentionally delayed developing Tea Party cases that you handled. Am I correct in that?
Yes, sir, you are.
Okay. And back to you, Mr. Hall. You never intentionally stalled or delayed your work with Ms. Hoffaker on the Tea Party cases, did you?
No, sir.
Okay. And now we've learned that there was a miscommunication between the senior management in the Cincinnati office and the group manager overseeing the political advocacy cases that caused a 13-month-long delay when the person Ms. Hoffaker transferred her cases to stopped sending development letters while waiting for guidance from the technical unit. Unfortunately, both the individual who held the cases and his manager at the time are Republicans, and neither of them was invited to testify here today to discuss that delay. I believe the delays in processing these political advocacy cases are highly problematic, but the evidence compiled by the committee does not suggest that they were intentional or motivated by bias. And Mr. Hall, did anyone tell you to stall or delay your work on the Tea Party cases?
No, sir.
And one IRS official we interviewed was an attorney in the IRS Office of Chief Counsel who worked on these cases. And when he was asked if anyone ever instructed him to stall or delay providing guidance on how to develop these cases, he responded as follows: no. On the contrary, we were told to work extremely fast. We were given a 48-hour time deadline on the first document. We turned around and had such extremely short deadlines to turn that around. As far as you understand, I'll throw it up to both witnesses. Is that correct?
I'm not aware of anything in that regard, sir.
Well, thanks very much. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman. We now go to the gentleman from Utah, Mr. Chaffetz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I do think it's important that we continue on to find the truth. And I appreciate your holding this hearing, and for these two fine Americans who are coming forward, and I appreciate your service. Nearly 70 years of service between the two of you in the IRS. Both have served in the military, and for that we're very grateful, and we thank you. Ms. Hoffaker, we've had your reaction to some of the statements by some very powerful people in Washington. I'd like to have you comment, if you could, about the accuracy of their comments. We had CNN reported the former Commissioner Miller blamed 2 employees in Cincinnati. I think the quote was 2 rogue agents. Is that true or not true in your opinion?
Sir, I'm not clear on what you're asking.
The former commissioner, IRS Commissioner Miller, blamed all this targeting on 2 rogue agents.
Correct.
I would suspect that you would be one of those 2 rogue agents.
It was inferred that I was one of them.
Is that true? Were you
No,
one of
it was
these
not. I was following directions from management, and they were aware of what I was doing.
Who is that management?
Well, when I started the project, it was Joseph Herr, and then I was transferred to another group, Steve Bowling.
When the spokesperson for the President of the United States, Jay Carney, stood up before the American people and said, quote, IRS line personnel had improperly targeted conservative groups. What's the accuracy of that statement?
Sir, I know the accuracy of any inference to rogue agents is not correct.
There had to be a moment when you went back home, you're kind of by yourself. What was that like?
Well, like I said to the other gentleman, it was like a nuclear fallout. I mean, the press hounded my family and me. They were hounding us at work. So, I mean, it wasn't a character builder.
Why did they do that? Why was everybody?
I don't have any factual knowledge of why they said what they said or why they did what they did.
What could you do about it?
There's nothing I could have done.
What did you want to do?
Go back to my life previous, before May 10th.
And I guess that's the sad part of the story. You know, I'm glad that truth's surfacing, because I think most people now, reflecting back, are going to understand that you're more heroic in this. And really, I think when you have such senior, powerful people in Washington, D.C., trying to discredit you and your person, your service, it's just wrong. And I'm proud of the fact that we are pursuing this. You know, if we did what the White House wanted us to do, if we did what the ranking member suggested we do, this thing would be over. Nothing here. Don't do it. As far as I'm concerned, it's over. When you have the spokesperson for the President of the United States make a definitive statement that it was 2 rogue agents and start poking at these people who have no power to do anything about it, that is wrong. How dare anybody suggest that we're at the end of this? This is the beginning of this. We have to make an example of it. We need to get to the bottom of it. And quite frankly, I'm tired of this administration having to keep having these hearings. We've done it on Fast and Furious. We're doing it on Benghazi. We're doing it on the IRS. Why? Each time, there's a pattern. Nothing here. Oh, it's just a couple people. Just move on. That's not true. When the ranking member went on national television and said that this case should be closed, that's wrong. And I have the greatest respect for him.
The gentleman yields.
Yes.
Let me be clear, because there's some old talking points going on here.
No,
at least
claiming my time.
I want to answer your allegation.
And I want
to reclaim my time. Gentlemen, it's the gentleman's time.
To suggest that they're just talking points?
30 seconds once he finishes.
These are not just talking points.
Oh, come on, Isa.
Yield the gentleman time.
Thank you. Let me be very clear. I hope the gentleman will join me when I say that I want every single syllable of every single transcript that we can get, every redactions, appropriate redactions put out here. I've been asking for that, and I want that. What I said was, when it came to the issue of saying that the President and the White House was responsible for this, I said that the evidence to that point, and continues to be, not there. As far as the investigation is concerned, I want us to get to the bottom of that, and I really mean that. It is very, very, very important. So I just wanted to make that clear.
Can I ask unanimous consent for 30 seconds?
Of course.
Part of the reason it has risen to this level is that you have the White House spokesman, Jay Carney, blaming one of the people sitting there at this table. You have the former acting commissioner saying it was 2 rogue agents. It was the most powerful people in Washington, D.C., placing blame on the person sitting before us. And that's why it continues forward. And that's why I do think the White House is now engaged in this.
The gentleman is entitled to his opinion. We will stick to the facts here at this time. We thank the gentlelady for her showing that it's not Cincinnati. With that, we go to the gentlelady from New York.
Thank you, and thank you for your public service and for being here today and for your testimony. I would like to get to the bottom of this and get over with it too, and I have to ask you, I'd like to ask both of you, would it make your professional life easier if you were not retired and still working, if it was just very clear in the law that no not-for-profit that engages in political activity shall receive in any way, shape, or form a tax relief from the IRS? Would that make your life easier in doing your job, Mr. Hall?
Yes, I think it would.
How about you, Ms. Hafiz?
I agree with Mr. Hall.
Okay, well, I intend to put in such a bill. Let's just stop it. Let's just make sure that there's never any confusion in the future. The IRS is there to perform a function, not to decide whether someone's involved in political activity or not. And quite frankly, most Americans believe that not-for-profits serve an important role if they're addressing a social concern in need of this great country and deserve a tax deduction. But certainly political activity does not. So in concerns of efficiency and clearness, I think that's the approach we should take in a bipartisan way, and in this, as my colleagues on both sides of the aisle want to do so much. Let me say that as a member of Congress, we do have a serious responsibility and a constitutional responsibility to practice and conduct oversight. But we must do it in a responsible and clear way and not make unfounded political attacks or use this incredibly important responsibility to make a political point. And one of the myths that keep being pushed out there by the right and some others is that the Obama campaign was somehow involved in directing the IRS to target Tea Party groups for unfair scrutiny. And according to all the testimony that I've read, many people testified, only 2 of you before us, but in the depositions, they've all said there was no connection whatsoever. But to give an example of sort of unfounded conduct and statements, I'd like to quote Senator Rubio, who recently claimed on national television that both the Obama administration and President Obama's campaign had attempted to use the IRS, and I will quote directly, "muscle anyone who is their political power they have at their disposal to intimidate people who they don't agree with," end quote. So I would like to ask both of you the same question. Were any of you intimidated or contacted or influenced in any way, shape, or form by the Obama campaign committee to do anything? Mr. Hall?
No, I was not contacted.
Okay, Ms.
No, ma'am, I was not.
Did anyone from the campaign, either a political appointee, a volunteer, a bystander, or an employee, ever give instructions or directions on how to process Tea Party applications? Did anyone interfere in the process? Mr. Hall?
No.
Ms. Huffington?
No.
Okay, did any of your IRS colleagues ever tell you that the Obama campaign gave them any instructions or directions on how to process applications for tax-exempt status of Tea Party applicants? Did any
No, they
other
did not.
employee?
No, they did not.
They did not. Now, they are giving the exact same answers that were given also by other witnesses that were interviewed by both the Republican and Democratic committee, that it's completely unstamped. It's not true. It's unstamped. I'm very concerned about this because it keeps going on, and I just want to make it very clear that there was no connection whatsoever. Correct?
That is correct.
That is correct.
And again, would it make your life easier if we just had clear directions from Congress that no not-for-profit receive any tax deduction whatsoever for if they engage in political activity?
I'm sure it would be a help.
Yes, it would.
I yield back the balance of my time.
If a gentlelady would yield,
Sure.
a follow-up just to get clarity on your question. Mr. Hall?
Yes, sir.
Wouldn't the American Lung Association support of an initiative in California, the NAACP's support of civil rights, wouldn't all of those be a challenge in which you'd like to have clarity that 0 may not be the right number either?
I'm not sure I'd be able to answer that question, sir.
But currently it's roughly 5% for 501c3s and under 50% for 501c4s. You would have a challenge if you had to audit at 0 for organizations such as the American Lung Association that actually endorses initiatives and so on. And I only ask this for the gentlelady. We're not the tax committee, but I think we have to work together to find solutions for this.
Yeah.
Hopefully we'll recognize that the narrow interpretation of none might in fact hamper very good charities that we all support.
Will the gentleman yield?
Of course.
The difficulty, it appears to me, is when an employee who's trying to do their job honestly and fairly and correctly is then given the task to interpret the 5%. That's a very difficult thing to do when you don't have access to their books or their activities or everything they're doing. And given the fact that our democracy is such a sacred right, and I want to share this with you very quickly. The ambassador from Pakistan, they just had their first peaceful transfer of power, and they are so thrilled that they had a peaceful election. We've had that honor our entire existence.
I thank the gentleman.
And it's important to honor that and continue that honor clearly and fairly. And the allegations are very serious allegations against the American democratic system that the tax code would be used in any way to promote an election in any way, shape, or form. And
the
so
gentlelady's time has really
I feel very
expired.
strongly about it, and I appreciate that they agree that they don't want to get involved in the elections. And
Please, the gentlelady's time really has expired. We now go to the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Walberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for continuing these hearings because, frankly, it is important to get to the truth, and I thank the two witnesses here today. You deserve your day to have the truth come out, especially since you were put in as rogues incorrectly. I've read in D.C. newspapers and seen on cable news that some people believe the IRS case is solved. We know that not to be the case. My constituents, the groups in question, those being targeted, the evidence we've uncovered so far and continue to look for says differently. And so we appreciate you being here. Ms. Hoffaker, just to continue some questioning, where you had indicated that in working with Mr. Hall, initially plenty of responsiveness, information was shared, questions were answered, but that slowed down.
Yes, sir, that is correct.
And though it might not have been direct statements from individuals above you saying slow it down, yet it was starting to slow walk in the process.
Yes, sir, as Mr. Hall pointed out, he stopped responding to me.
And we know from his testimony that there are reasons why he stopped responding or slowed it down because of hurdles that were put in his way and disagreements that took place as well. Were taxpayers calling you still during this time period?
Yes, sir, they continued to call me probably till the end of 2010, beginning of 2011.
How often would you get the calls?
Well, initially, I got numerous calls a day.
What did you tell them?
I continually told them that the cases were under review.
How did that make you feel, telling them that the cases were under review?
Like I said in my testimony, it was like working in lost luggage. I mean, there was never any positive response because I couldn't give them a clear answer. And like I may have said in my previous testimony, that every taxpayer deserved an answer, because if the answer is negative, they have other avenues they can pursue, like appeals, to look at it from a different angle, perhaps.
You said also, I remember in your response to the committee, I remember thinking this is ridiculous, because at the same time you are getting calls from irate taxpayers, and I see their point. Even if a decision isn't favorable, they deserve some kind of a treatment. They deserve, timeliness. And it was just these applications and their responses were just being sent up there, and I'm not sure what was happening, but I just kept getting the same responses from Carter Hall. They are under review, and that is what I told the taxpayer.
I continued to tell them that, yes, sir.
Did you express frustration to anyone about the delays in the process?
Yes, sir. I expressed it to my manager at the time, Steve Bowling.
Steve Bowling. I understand you told the committee staff that you expressed that frustration, and what was his response?
He was just saying that he was waiting on Washington, and then he was just waiting on them.
I understand you switched positions in October of 2010. That's correct.
Yes, sir, that is correct.
What caused you to switch positions?
It was the frustration of working on this project. Like I may have previously said, I was getting more and more Tea Party applications. I was also getting applications with any kind of political or legislative activity, and I was tasked to do Tea Parties, but I think I said in my previous interview that I became a dumping ground probably around August 2010, so I was seeing every case with any inkling of any kind of political or legislative activity. At the same time, I was getting slammed with phone calls from taxpayers who seemed to have a legitimate, right to complain about the process because they deserve some kind of answer at that time, and that was 3 years ago.
What happened to the Tea Party cases in your queue when you transferred?
They were transferred to another agent.
Who was that agent?
It was Ron Bell.
And Ron Bell, do you know if he was able to make any progress on these cases?
From what I understand, no.
Did you have any contact with him over these cases subsequent to your transfer?
I was still receiving telephone calls from taxpayers, so.
On these issues from taxpayers to you?
Right, for about a few months after I changed, so I would call him and give him the name of the applicant and the contact number to have him call them and tell them what was going on.
Did he indicate to you whether they continued in a holding pattern?
I was led to believe they were in a holding pattern. I believe he did say that.
And these were just Tea Party cases, right?
In October of 2010, that is correct.
What's a pink slip?
Sir, a lot of these organizations, they all had various activities, but a couple of the applicants would have these email blasts on their websites, and you could send a pink slip to your congressman or your senator.
These were Tea Party groups?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. They were Tea Party group websites.
And so were you to select out these pink slips, organizations?
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentlelady may answer.
Sir, that was just one of their activities. If the activity was in the file, I would ask about it.
Well, I guess I just wonder what relevance that is to IRS, Mr. Chairman. Could I ask Ms. Hoffaker to answer that?
If the gentlelady would answer, and then that's the end.
Okay, sir, like we keep saying, it's facts and circumstances, and our job was to determine, and for me to get the information to help to determine whether or not they were primarily social welfare or political, and that was just one piece of the pie.
Okay. Thank the gentleman.
I thank you. The gentlelady from Illinois, Ms. Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Hull, I understand that you were originally assigned 2 Tea Party cases in April of 2010, and then had those cases transferred away from you in August of 2011. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Were you given any special instructions on how to work those cases?
No, I was not.
Did anyone ask you to give them special attention?
No, no one asked me to give them special attention.
Okay. When you sat down with the committee in June of 2013, you told staff that you asked for a special card to be drawn up so that you could put your time into that particular place, coordinating Cincinnati cases. Can you explain what you meant by this?
Each time we get a case, you get a card saying this is your case and you're working it. Because I knew I'd be spending time on coordinating Tea Party cases with Ms. Hovaker, I asked that a card be made up so that when I did talk to her, I could put my time correctly as to what I was doing.
Okay. Did taking these cases on add a significant burden to your workload?
Yes, it did.
Did they add to the many responsibilities that you already had?
Yes, they did.
I want to ask about the process of having the cases transferred away from you to a different tax law specialist who identified herself to the committee as a Republican. Mr. Hull, do you know why these cases were transferred from your inventory to that of the other tax law specialists?
I was never told the reason.
Never told, okay. Were they transferred away from you in order to give them extra scrutiny or to further delay them?
I have no knowledge of that.
According to evidence gathered by the committee, it appears that these cases were transferred so they would be worked more efficiently. Mr. Hull, a manager in the technical unit, acknowledged your experience in working on 501c3 applications, but told the committee that you were not moving fast enough on these cases. Specifically, he said, quote, "It was taking longer time than I would expect for someone at his level." He told committee staff that the cases you were working had been, quote, "stagnant for a year and a half," so he and his manager decided to reassign the cases. Ms. Harford, you told committee staff that at first Mr. Hull was, quote, "more timely," but as the months dragged on, he became less timely and non-responsive. Is that accurate?
Yes, ma'am, that is.
Mr. Hull, did you know that your managers and Ms. Holford wanted you to move more quickly on these cases?
I can't remember them ever expressing that to me.
As we can see, the original Tea Party cases were not transferred within the technical unit, so they would be delayed and given extra scrutiny. Instead, the opposite was true. These cases were transferred away from Mr. Hull, where they were a burden on his already heavy workload, to another tax law specialist in order to ensure that they would be processed more efficiently. And thank you both. Yes.
Gentleman, yield.
I yield.
I just want to pick up on one thing, Mr. Hall. I want to thank the gentlelady for yielding. So your cases were transferred to a Republican. Is that what she said?
I have no knowledge of what Ms. Gohausen's political affiliation was.
Mm-hmm. And you said you had not received any complaints about your work speed or anything like that?
Not that I can recall, sir.
And Ms. Hoffaker, you never complained to him about his work speed or anything, did you?
No, I did not.
Okay. And, but again, when you look at all of this, when you're trying to figure out, Ms. Hoffaker, what part of a case is, I mean, an organization's work is political and which part is for general welfare, is that a complicated situation?
Yes, sir, it's 51%.
And how do you do that?
Again, it's facts and circumstances.
So you got to really go through each case very carefully.
That is correct.
Would you agree with that, Mr. Hall?
Yes, I would.
So you had gone through the cases and looked through them very carefully, Mr. Hall?
Yes, I did, the cases I had.
The factual patterns of each one?
Of the two cases that were assigned to me, yes, sir.
And what did you go through to get to your conclusions?
I did research. I went to their website. I looked for prior precedent and as to how cases like this may have been handled in the past to try to decide what my recommendation should be.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We now go to the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Langford.
Thank you, and thank both of you for being here. You know very well, because you've heard from people, that when others talk about applications and groups, These folks have names and faces. Some of them live in my district as some of the individuals that waited a very, very long time to get a response on that. So I appreciate both of your work and your diligence through the process on this. Mr. Hall, I understand the Tea Party test case were a sensitive case report. Is that correct?
A sensitive case report was sent up every month. Yes, sir.
Okay. I want to ask for the slide. I think we have one of those that the staff has requested. Is this the, I'm not sure if you can tell from where you are, but does this look like one of the sensitive test case reports?
I can't actually read anything, but the form looks familiar.
Yeah, the form looks correct on it. We'll try to get a copy of it to you from there. The top part of it seems to have just a template information, and then the middle to the bottom of it seems to be filled in. Let me read some of the stuff that's in it. Where it says the case or issue summary, it says the various Tea Party organizations are separately organized but appear to be part of a national political movement that may be involved in political activities. The Tea Party organizations are being followed closely in national newspapers such as the Washington Post almost on a regular basis. Further down, it says this, met with Jay Kendall to discuss organizations 2 and 3 and service position. Mrs. Kendall recommended additional development activities, i.e. the activities then forwarded were then on to the chief counsel. Later on, it says coordination between HQ and Cincinnati is continuing regarding information letters to applicants exemption under 501c3 and 501c4. Mr. Hall, does this sound like the document that you had created there?
Yes, it does.
Did someone instruct you to create a sensitive case report for Tea Party cases?
My manager, Mr. Shoemaker, asked me to prepare one.
Okay, well, I need to ask a question on it. At one point, you write into this, met with Jay Kendall to discuss organizations 2 and 3 and service position. What did you mean by discussing service position?
Whether or not the organization the facts would go to exemption or denial.
So trying to make a broad decision on that, you're waiting on decisions on a broader case, because I know you've said a lot this is a case by case, and you pushed back on saying this can't be a template response because each case is different on it. So I'm trying to interpret the service position, what that might be in that conversation.
Well, at this point, the service position was going to be decided, I thought, by Chief Counsel. I had given my recommendations, and I had never received back one way or the other whether either recommendation was acceptable to the higher-ups.
You're continuing to wait on the counsel's office to be able to give you a response back so that you could finish up these cases. You're waiting on a service position, not only just the 2 and 3, not only these 2 individual sensitive test cases that you're working with, but also trying to figure out what is going to be the broader perspective as well?
If we were able to tell from the facts and circumstances of each particular case whether they should or not be recognized as exempt, then I could be able to tell Ms. Hoffaker that yes, if this organization was recognized as exempt, and since if she was transferred, it would have gone to Mr. Bell.
Okay, but that's waiting on counsel's office to be able to respond back to you to be able to get that back to him.
Yes, sir.
Okay, aside from the sensitive case reports you created for the 3 Tea Party applications, did you create sensitive case reports for any other political advocacy cases between March 2010 and July 2011?
Not that I'm aware of, sir.
You had mentioned earlier as well, further review is extremely rare. What did you mean by that?
Usually, if my reviewer agrees with me, the case can go to the supervisor for signature. Usually, most cases only last that far, application cases. Some application cases go further up to Ms. Kendall or someone else, and some go to Chief Counsel.
Okay, but in this case, the reviewer agreed. Is that correct, or?
She neither agreed nor disagreed. She just said it should be forwarded.
It was just a hold on it. You also mentioned that Lois Lerner at some point came in and said in some kind of training environment that these cases need to be referred to as advocacy applications, not Tea Party applications.
That's correct.
Was that for all of these political or just for these particular Tea Party groups?
Ms. Lerner seemed to indicate that any time we should use the word advocacy as opposed to Tea Party.
Not use Tea Party more, just call them advocacy groups and
correct.
Scrub the word, but you knew that she was referring to the Tea Party groups. Just say, don't say that, say advocacy applications only.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Ms. Lujan Grisham.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to talk a little bit about, I'm way over here, I'm sorry, and you guys are going to break your necks getting all the way to the end of the hearing room. But it's my understanding that in the 2 years following the Citizens United decision, which allowed social welfare organizations to directly spend money on campaign activities, the number of applications for 501c4 status nearly doubled. In the testimony that I've heard today and in previous hearings, it becomes clearer to me that there's no political motivation, but there is confusion at best about what you do about the facts and circumstances review to figure out whether more than 49% of a 501c4's funding has been spent directly on political activity. And following the line of questioning by my colleague from New York, Representative Mahoney, I have such a bill that says that the 1959 congressional law says it's exclusive, that the IRS, that the Treasury rule later that said you can do 49% should never have been allowed, that now we have what is a disorganized, at best, complete mess, and I agree with this committee that however you're objectively trying to take subjective information and identify whether or not there's been a violation has caused grave concerns by by this committee in particular. I think we should go back to exclusive, and the point that the chairman raised that they won't be able to advocate is not true. That in fact, as long as they're taking the positions, 501c3s are limited and 501c4s are not, as long as they're taking an advocacy position in line with that organization, like the Cancer Society or the Muscular Dystrophy Society, but engaged in broad political activity should not be allowed. You answered my colleague's question that Mr. Hull, that would certainly simplify this issue and allow the IRS to determine clearly and definitively who meets the standard for a 501c4 and who does not, correct?
It is very difficult to be able to say that an organization is involved 51% of their time in social welfare activities. There is no bright line that defines it. And it's the facts and circumstances, and they usually fall one way or the other, but there is no bright line at the present time.
And if they can still follow their basic 501c4 status, which means they can advocate their position and do their social welfare work, disengaging them from political activity should not harm those organizations. And is it also true if you want to engage in political activity, you can have a 527 or establish a super PAC, that there are many clear organizational structures that are not tax exempt that would allow you to engage directly in political activity. True?
There are such organizations, yes.
And in those organizations, those donors would have to be disclosed, correct?
I do not know the answer to that question.
I believe that's correct. And in that setting, it would be managing those efforts just like members of Congress are required to do. I think that's correct as well. And the point being that it seems, based on the testimony today and prior testimony, that the clear way forward, if we're going to solve the problem, which seems to me to be what we should do from here out, is that we should solve it. Let's make the 501c4s go back to exactly what Congress intended in 1959. They're exclusively for the purpose of social welfare. Mr. Chairman, I yield back the rest of my time.
I thank the gentlelady. The gentleman from Tennessee, Dr. Desjarlais, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you both on behalf of the people of Tennessee's 4th District and people across America. They're anxious to get to the facts on this case, and this case is not going away. One of your colleagues, Ms. Lerner, testified here briefly, and she proclaimed that she was innocent and did nothing wrong, and that very well may be the case. But I also believe that she knows a lot more, possibly a lot more than even the two of you, but yet she did not sit there and do what you're doing and testify. The big unanswered questions of all these hearings, Stella, is why. why were these groups targeted? And they were targeted. Mr. Werfel yesterday was kind enough to be one of the first to admit that the IRS did target conservative groups. Mr. Shulman, Miller, and others were reluctant to say that. So do either of you have an opinion on to why these groups were targeted in this fashion with your 62 years of combined experience?
I have no, I can't answer that question. I have no idea why they were targeted.
Have you ever seen anything like it before?
There were somewhat similar instances at one time. That was a long time ago, and I'm afraid my memory is very dim about that.
It wasn't like 40 years ago, was it? Just, and Ms. Hoffaker, go ahead.
I wasn't aware of any situation where applications were treated in this fashion.
Okay, so pretty unusual. The other question is who, and we're starting to get an idea of who. When we had other folks here, Mr. Shulman, I assume that some of the people you've named today probably do interact with the Commissioner. I don't know how high up they are, but do they actually interact with the Commissioner? Some of your bosses?
I would imagine so. I mean,
I have no knowledge of their
Okay, their testimony a while ago, they didn't know anything. They just knew that it was a couple of rogue agents in Cincinnati. That was the story, and I think we've dispelled that rumor. So we're still trying to find out who. And the President, may not know anything about why this happened, but we do know, I think we proved today, that one of his political appointees did know. Would you both agree with that? That this was going on, that this targeting was going on?
I have no factual basis to agree or disagree.
Okay, the Chief Counsel is a political appointee, correct?
From what I understand, that is
Is
correct.
that your understanding, Mr. Hull?
Yes.
And you both have testified that these cases were sent to the Chief Counsel's office?
Yes.
I was just made aware of that recently.
Okay. So at any rate, there does seem to be somebody who doesn't want the truth to come out. Because if there was nothing wrong done here, then we wouldn't be sitting here today. We wouldn't continue to have these hearings. Do you agree with that?
I have no knowledge of such a situation, sir.
Okay. Did you have a special expertise, Ms. Hofker, in this area of Tea Party organizations or this type of case you were asked to do?
I had no specific expertise in political organizations.
Any idea why you were assigned that, the majority?
At the time, it was identified by management as an emerging issue, and I was the emerging issue coordinator, so consequently, I was assigned the cases.
As you were doing these cases, both of you, did it ever dawn on you that this is kind of strange, there's something weird going on here, that this is abnormal, maybe I should suggest this to someone?
I did. I think that's the fact that I pursued another job is evidence of that.
Mr. Hall, did you find this strange?
I approached it as two organizations of which I was supposed to determine whether or not they were exempt. Okay. I did not go in any further type speculation.
You felt you were given an assignment, you were just doing your job?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Did either of you think it was strange the type of questions they were being asked? There were some pretty unusual questions asked, like donor information. Do you think that was inappropriate?
Go ahead.
I think they were inappropriate, and when I learned of that, I did talk to somebody and say that question should not be asked, because the C4, it doesn't really matter where the money comes from. It's what their organization's activities are.
Wouldn't it make, as you were asked earlier, wouldn't it make your lives a lot easier if someone within the IRS, if this was designed within the IRS to target these groups, would just step up and say, I did this, or even the President, if the President didn't know about it, wouldn't it make life easier if someone on the President's team who made this decision and sent it down to you would just step up and say, I did this, so the American people can start to regain the credibility that they deserve from an agency that expects so much of them?
So I cannot comment on that.
Okay. I wouldn't find able to comment either, sir.
Okay. Well, I know that you guys are very brave to come forward, and really, you're just telling the truth, and that's all we're asking from other people who come forward as well. So let me just say we very much appreciate that, and we hope for the sake of the country and everyone else that we do get to the bottom of this, because there's obviously something to be determined, and thank you for your help. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. We'll now go to the gentlelady from Illinois, Ms. Duckworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hall, thank you for your years of military service in Vietnam. and of course, Ms. Hoffaker, for your over 13 years of service in the Army. Mr. Hall, I would like to ask about the involvement of the IRS Office of the Chief Counsel in this process. It's my understanding that the IRS Office of the Chief Counsel sometimes reviews applications for tax-exempt status in order to provide legal advice. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
It's also my understanding that all 501c3 denials are reviewed by the IRS Office of the Chief Counsel as part of standard procedure. Is that correct?
I believe that is standard procedure, yes.
Okay. In this case, your boss asked the Chief Counsel's office to review the 2 Tea Party cases you were working. Did you agree with that decision?
I agree that the cases should go to the Chief Counsel, yes.
Okay, thank you. You know, we talked to a number of your colleagues who agreed with the decision to obtain advice on these cases from the Office of Chief Counsel. For example, the committee spoke with a tax law specialist who took over the Tea Party cases that you had been working, and you'd established that your workload was heavy. She took those over. She, in fact, has identified herself as a Republican to this committee, and she told us that on some issues it was common to ask the IRS Chief Counsel's office for assistance in review of applications for tax-exempt status. And I just want to quote what she said. And she said, from my experience, it's been cases, applications that have received some media attention or that, like in the C4 instances, the law is really murky. Those have been my experiences with the cases that I've had sent to them, and to them she means the Chief Counsel. Mr. Ho, do you agree with your colleague that the cases that sometimes get sent to the Chief Counsels are the ones that are murky, that are difficult, that need further clarification?
I don't believe I can comment on what reasons they gave to send to Chief Counsel. I'm not aware of those particular murky things.
When you send cases to, when your cases that you've worked on that have gone to Chief Counsel, you said that if they're denied, then they go to the Chief Counsel. Were there other cases in your time that also went to Chief Counsel for further clarification?
I don't recall any. I believe the C3 questions are gone up if they're denials, because Chief Counsel would have to defend them, and that's why they go up there.
I understand. Okay. Do you have any reason to believe that your colleague who took over your 2 cases is biased against Tea Party groups?
I have no knowledge of that at all.
Thank you. We also committee spoke to an attorney in the IRS Chief Counsel's office who attended a meeting about the 2 specific Tea Party cases and assisted with drafting guidance for the development of political advocacy cases in 2012. And we asked him whether it was appropriate for the Office of Chief Counsel to review these two Tea Party cases, and he said this: it's customary, it would certainly be customary, it makes perfect sense that, we have seen this situation before where they have a group of cases that they would send over sometimes to look at. Mr. Ho, do you disagree with your colleague?
I don't think I have enough knowledge to understand what he was getting at. My 2 cases that went over to Chief Counsel, I'm not sure how long it had been since I'd sent a case to Chief Counsel.
Okay. We also spoke with an employee who served as the exempt organization's technical unit group manager in Washington, D.C., and this employee said it was quite typical to send to counsel cases that were particularly difficult where there was felt to be a need for further review of the case. Do you agree with with this statement?
I think that person would have had more knowledge of those cases than I. I'm not aware of all the cases that may or may not have gone to Chief Counsel.
Okay. Mr. Ho, do you have any reason to believe that the decision to have the IRS Chief Counsel's office review Tea Party cases was motivated by political bias?
No, I do not.
And so it seems to me that seeking advice from one of the 1,600 lawyers in the IRS on a complicated legal question seems reasonable. And numerous witnesses have told us that this was not a stalling tactic or evidence of a political bias, but in fact at this time it was common that if you had questions, that's what legal counsel was to refer and ask them additional clarification. And of course you did talk about the fact that if they are denied, then they go right to the legal counsel. I too want to thank both of you for being here. I know that you were both moved off of these cases, Ms. Hoffaker, because you went on to another position. Mr. Hall, your 2 cases went on to another employee. So sometimes when we're talking about these rogue agents, I'm not necessarily talking about you, but that there are many people who were in this chain of confusion that led to these cases being delayed for a long period of time. Thank you so much for being here. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman from South Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have been fascinated by, and not necessarily in a good way, by the evolution of the defense in this case. Mr. Chairman, initially it started when Lois Lerner disclosed this information in a fashion most calculated to be ignored, with a planted question at some boring conference. And then the second iteration of this defense was blaming two rogue agents in the Ohio field office. And Mr. Chairman, make no mistake, Jay Carney advanced and furthered that narrative, and he did so intentionally. You know, Mr. Carney's willingness to say, I don't know, is exceeded perhaps only by his willingness to acknowledge that he appreciates the question. But he didn't say, I don't know. He advanced the narrative that two rogue agents were responsible for this insidious discriminatory practice. And then we had colleagues that said this matter was closed. Months ago, Mr. Chairman, the matter was closed. And then the new iteration of the defense says, well, at least the White House isn't directly involved, as if that's the new standard for propriety in this town, that at least the White House directly didn't know about it. So that's our defense. And then the defense, Mr. Chairman, morphed into this, the most novel of all defenses, that the IRS is too poorly managed to be capable of concocting a scheme this sophisticated. That was the defense, that my client's too dumb to have committed this crime. And then, Mr. Chairman, we moved to the most recent defense, which is that, no, we didn't just improperly target conservative groups, we improperly targeted all groups. So while we may be guilty of improper conduct, we're not guilty of discrimination, because we did it against people at both ends of the political spectrum. So that's our defense. And now to see the Inspector General attacked. You know, Mr. Chairman, there was an axiom in court that if you had the facts, pound the facts. If you had the law, pound the law. If you didn't have either one, pound the judge. And what's been said about Mr. George is reprehensible, and I can't wait till he has an opportunity to defend himself. But let me tell you what else is reprehensible, Mr. Chairman. Lois Lerner sat where those two witnesses sit today, several weeks ago. And these two witnesses put on a uniform and fought and defended this country and the Constitution so she could hide behind the Constitution and invoke her Fifth Amendment right, but only after she blamed them. She blamed two rogue agents in Ohio, and then didn't have the courage that these witnesses. I ought to just be thankful anytime IRS agents don't invoke the Fifth Amendment. I ought to be glad that anyone's willing to come before a committee of Congress and testify. But to have these two people's reputation, or whoever she was talking about, besmirched by someone who doesn't even have the courage to come do what they're doing? Mr. Hall, I appreciate your modesty. It's not something we see very often in this town. But you have been in service to the IRS for exactly as long as I've been alive. 48 years. So whether you want to be called an expert or not, you are one, by virtue of your training and your expertise and your education, and so are you, Ms. Hoffaker. You're both experts. And if we were in a court of law, the defense would stipulate that you're experts. They wouldn't even challenge it. So I've heard about the complexities, and I've heard about the novel issues, but Mr. Hall, there's nothing novel about political activity. It's been going around since before the country was founded. So that part of the analysis, what was novel about that? What's novel about determining political activity?
Each case is looked at and depends on the facts and circumstances of each particular case.
And you've done it 100 times. Times 100 times, right?
I'm not aware of how many political cases I may have worked.
Is it because you can't count that high? I mean, it's a lot, right?
I can't remember that far back, sir.
Well, I can't either. I can't either. But there's nothing new about political activity. And our numeric code we've had since Lord knows when. I think it's Arabic, but ascertaining 50% is not a new phenomenon. So, Mr. Chairman, I'm out of time. I'm just vexed by the complexity that our colleagues on the other side of the aisle talk about. It's political activity. 50.1% will disqualify you, and the tax code's been around forever. So what's new about this? Why did we have to have test cases? Why did we have to have Washington involved on what strikes me as a pretty simple analysis? But I'm out of time, and I yield back to the chairman.
Thank the gentleman. Chair now recognizes Ms. Norton. I'm sorry, I didn't know which of the three were next on the list here. Ms. Norton, you're recognized. The gentlelady from D.C.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Without trying to answer the gentleman's question about complexity, there can be a great deal of complexity when you tell someone that something has to be 51, quote, political. The most pregnant word in the English language is the word political. What is political and what is not political? And I want to congratulate these two civil servants for having the courage to come forward before this committee. These are civil servants of the IRS, which this Congress has cut by 30%. President won't sign that. It will not get through the Senate. But out of retaliation, somehow against what we are told is targeting by agents, rogue agents. I don't see any rogue agents. I see civil servants who are on furloughs and who are trying to deal with the complexities, and it has lots of complexities that come before you every day, and I congratulate you for the way you do it. I don't see targeting even. I don't see confusion. You get into targeting, we're into one for one. This is what I see, and my question really goes to it. Forgive me for getting out the statute, but it says concerning these social welfare organizations that they must be operated exclusively for the promotion of social welfare, and they say if it is primarily engaged in promoting in some way the common good and general welfare of the people of the community. Then it goes on to define what it means by exclusively, to say an organization embraced within this section is one which is operated primarily for the purpose of bringing about civic betterments and social improvements. I say I wouldn't want to be in your position to look first at the words exclusively, then primarily, and then trying to figure it out. I cite that because I don't see what so many are looking for here, and I want to find it if I can. So I look to see, well, why would anybody pick out anybody? And I noted that after Citizens United, and remember we're talking about 501c4, so what do you get from wanting to be 501c4? Well, you don't get any tax exemption, but you don't have to disclose your donors. And you can raise apparently unlimited funds, if I'm correct on that. Isn't that true? You can raise unlimited funds for 501c4, Mr. Hall?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, there was a surge in spending, because the figures are in now on the surge in spending in the last campaign. Almost 85% of that surge, of those funds for 501c4 organizations went to, and others, went to organizations which have conservative viewpoints. Now, after Citizens United, it would not be unusual, would it, for those who wanted to spend a lot of money and had access to it, that is their right in this country, to take advantage of a court decision and come forward in the numbers that they had not
done before? Could that not be reflected in seeing this large surge where you were assigned to look at this special group called Tea Party type applications?
Did you have a particular question, ma'am?
Yes, whether or not you think the opportunity for spending unlimited amounts of money opened the door for people who had that money to spend to come forward, or had access to it, to come forward and say, please give us this status which we have not had before. Wouldn't if you knew you could get funds in a way you had not thought of before, because you now can get unlimited funds, there would be reason to come forward and ask for the status that you had not done before?
I'm sure there would be.
The gentlelady's time has expired. We now go to, but if there's a pending question anyone wants to answer, go ahead.
Can we have a short break?
We'll take a 5-minute break now. Thank you. Stand in recess.